imagine you're out one evening with some friends from your sport, and as a conversation starter, you say, "So how's everyone feeling about death?" You probably wouldn't do that, admittedly, it's a bit of a weird question, but I wonder, how do you think that conversation would go? Your generation, Gen Z, are apparently more comfortable talking about death than previous ones. Death, no longer a taboo. COVID, of course, brought it front and center to each of our everyday lives. The assisted dying bill, more recently, capturing the attention and emotions of many. On TikTok, death is often discussed openly too, sometimes even humorously within a subculture called death talk. Have you heard of it? It is actually a thing. Creators use comedy approaches to talk about serious topics like end-of-life care, funeral arrangements, the realities of dying, all with the aim of making death a more approachable subject for people to discuss and process. But maybe death is just not on yours or your friends' radars right now. Feels distant. Life now is what matters. I'm very conscious, though, that for some here today, death, loss, grief, fear won't feel distant at all. Will be very close, very real, and very hard right now in your family, in your sport. In 2006, and many of you were born, but DUHC, Durham University Hockey Club, won Bucks. It was amazing. We were the champions, top of the world, top-level hockey ahead of us, graduate life. But within 3 years of leaving Durham, 2 girls that I'd played hockey with there had died. One in a ski accident and one of cancer. Sir Chris Hoy, British cycling legend, 6-time Olympic champion, 11-time world champion. He was interviewed by the Sunday Times in October about his recent terminal cancer diagnosis, and he said, "As unnatural as it feels, this is nature. You know, we were all born and we all die. And this is just part of the process. Just part of the process. Death, just part of the process." Of course, it's totally understandable, admirable that he is trying to find the good in it all and so brave to speak out. It really is. But a healthy Olympian, commentator, dad of 3 young children, getting diagnosed with a terminal illness, just part of the process? A teammate suddenly dying, doing something they love, just part of the process? Someone in the harrowing, darkest valleys of depression, feeling the only way out is to take their own life. Is that just part of the process? Death is a tragedy. Families plunged into deep grief, like the sisters in our story tonight, feelings and emotions which at times feel unbearable, that never really go away. Some of you know that. No, death is not just part of the process. Death is the enemy to life itself. Death was not in God's good, perfect creation at the beginning, and it won't be in the new creation to come. It is the utterly devastating consequence to humanity's rejection and rebellion against God. And it should scream to us, wrong, broken. Chris Hoy was right when he said it feels unnatural. Our friends feel it. We feel it. Actually, for Christians today, I think the issue of death is probably one of the things which most raises people's doubts. Why all the suffering, Lord? Why all this death? Jesus, the good shepherd? Jesus, the light of the world who gives life? There's a book called How Long, O Lord, by Don Carson. It's about suffering and questions of God's goodness and sovereignty that can arise in times of pain. And in it, he makes a really interesting point. He says that the best time to counsel and pastor people about death and suffering and making sense of it is before the hard times really kick in. That often in the depths of grief, it's very difficult for people to process very much at all. Some of you have already experienced big grief, and I hope you find fresh comfort and hope in the words of Jesus this afternoon. But for many of us, probably not yet. So what a time to get clear on who Jesus is now, to be strengthened and prepared in our faith for when the hard times come, because we know the great I am. It's great, isn't it, to be at something like this last night together, singing songs like, Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. But in reality, when we get back out there soon, and then into our teams, our clubs, we find so much disbelief, doubt, and it's hard. It can be really hard to keep believing, and especially in times of suffering and death. But how kind God is to give us stories like this one today, where the whys and the doubts and the wrestles of the Christian life aren't pushed to the side like they're shameful or embarrassing, but are lovingly, pastorally engaged with head on by Jesus as we meet two sisters grieving the untimely, unnatural, you might say, death of their brother Lazarus. So open your Gospels with me. Look again at scene 1. That's verse 1 to 16. Lazarus is ill, but he and his sisters know the Lord. Verse 3, they sent word to Jesus. Verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Jesus knows them by name. He is their good shepherd. So it's a bit surprising, isn't it? When in verse 6, Jesus hears that Lazarus is ill, but decides to stay where he is 2 more days. I mean, surely it should read, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he went straight away. Jesus loved them, right? Instead, verse 4, Jesus said, this illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. For God's glory, he delayed. Verse 14, for the sake of your unbelief, he delayed. In other words, what Jesus is going to do, having waited for Lazarus to die before going to him, is going to show God's glory in Jesus in a way that we wouldn't see if he'd just gone and healed him. It's going to show the greatness and power and authority of who Jesus is, the great I am, in a way that we wouldn't see if he'd just gone and healed him from his illness. Jesus is not an egomaniac wanting to put on a big show. Jesus is a loving, good shepherd. He knows us better than anyone. And he wants to help us in our wobbles, to lead us through our unbelief, to strengthen us where we feel weak. Did you notice the disciples' faith at this point in John certainly appears a little flaky? So verse 8, they're scared of being stoned. Verse 12, they misunderstand the metaphor of Lazarus being asleep. They've not understood who Jesus is fully. They need their faith muscles stretched to grow through this. And so do we. Wobbly, shaky belief. It is a normal part of the ordinary Christian life. Especially when we're in the middle of the story of suffering and grief, like Mary and Martha are here. Their brother was dying. Jesus didn't show up like they'd asked him to. See Martha, verse 21, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Mary, verse 32, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. In other words, why weren't you here? And the crowd feel it too. Verse 37, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Mary and Martha weren't unbelievers. They weren't skeptics. They knew Jesus. They'd seen what he'd done to the blind man, sight. They were his friends. But they didn't know what we know now. They didn't know how the story would end. They hadn't seen the glory of Jesus as the great I am. The glory of Jesus as the life giver, the death defeater, not yet, but soon they will. You know, sometimes as Christians in sport, I think we can approach our faith a little like we do our sport. How am I performing? Am I outbelieving her in this test of suffering? Will he keep believing if the worst happens? If he gets the dreaded call? Will I? But the normal Christian life that our good shepherd has called you and me into is not one of performing in our faith. It is about believing and trusting in Jesus. Even in our unbelief, despite the wobbles, in the testing times, throwing ourselves on Jesus, fixing our eyes on him, his goodness, his power, his glory, that is what will keep us going. We have not graduated from grace. I love that phrase, Dunks. We need him. Oh, Lord, we need you. And he's come. He comes. Verse 17, Jesus arrives on the scene in Bethany. Lazarus, now dead for 4 days. His sisters and their many friends deep in the trenches of grief. But look at what he does. Jump to verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Verse 38, Jesus, once more, deeply moved. You know, the original meaning, translation of the words used here are describing an almost aggressive sounding grief. The kind of cry that is filled with groans and screams, tears that make your face go red and blotchy, wet with snot. It's meant to be quite shocking. Death is not just part of the process for Jesus. Jesus is not playing a game with Lazarus. He is deeply moved by his death, pained by Mary and Martha's loss. He cares. He knows. He loves. And Jesus sees the suffering and the death in our lives in this world, and he weeps. He weeps with us. Guys, this is so precious. Because even though we will see Jesus has a bigger purpose here for his glory, for our good, that people would believe, despite that bigger purpose, sometimes in the suffering and the pains of life, all we can take and all we can hear is, Jesus wept. But as we know, not them yet, but we do, there is more to the comfort of Jesus than just empathy and compassion. Jesus is on a mission, a warpath to destroy death completely. Look at his words to Martha in verse 25. They'll be on the screen too. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Mary and Martha were in the middle of their story of grief, but we know how it ended. We know that Jesus allowed this pain to show the disciples more about who he is, to help them see more fully the glory of God in Jesus. And so come with me to the final scene, verse 40. Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth round his face. "Take off the grave clothes. Let him go." Amazing, isn't it? So instant, so easy. Just 3 words. If you ever come as a leader at one of our Sports Plus camps, and I think you probably know now that we want you to come as a leader at one of our Sports Plus camps. But if you have the job of raising young people from their sleep, you will find, some of you have been those young people, but especially by Thursday or Friday morning, how hard it is. Young person, come out. Tends to have little to no effect. But Jesus here, Jesus has the power to make a dead man wrapped in his cloths come out. Jesus, the good shepherd who knows his sheep, who calls them by name, who calls Lazarus by name. Jesus, the good shepherd who gives life. I did a quick Google, as we all do, right? But I Googled the word life, and it's come up 25 times in John's gospel so far. But here, in a way he hasn't done yet, he puts his money where his mouth is. He proves it. He brings life. And the transformation of Lazarus from death to life, it is almost a comedy scene, isn't it? As he walks out, still wrapped, face covered. I'm sure death talk could have a field day with it. Actually, it really would be great if Death Talk got hold of this. Because this miracle was not just for them back then. It's a sign for us all now. A sign that we might believe that Jesus really is the resurrection and the life. A sign pointing forward to the rest of the gospel, to the end of the gospel, when we know the glory of Jesus will be revealed as he hangs on a cross and walks out of a tomb, smashing death and winning for all who believe life and life eternal. Do you believe it? Do you? Do you trust the Good Shepherd when he speaks tenderly, lovingly, powerfully into your story of suffering, into your story of death and pain? Probably the most faith-strengthening times in my life, when my muscles of belief have most grown, have actually been seeing close believers trust in and continue to follow their good shepherd, Jesus, in the face of death. There's been a few of these within Christians in sport over the years. And perhaps you'll have stories of your own to share, heroes of the faith. But a standout for me, if you just let me share for a moment, is my lovely mother-in-law, Moira. So kind and fun. I'd never met someone like her before. She never washed She never washed her own hair. Every Friday she went to the hairdressers for a wash and blow dry. She knew all the football scores, was obsessed with sport. She was terrified of cats and terrified of lifts, which I wish my husband had told me before one of our first meetings when I suggested that we took the fast glass elevator up 40 floors in a London office to get the best view of the city. Fortunately, there were no cats in the lift. But very sadly, at just 62, cancer got a grip of my lovely mother-in-law, and we quickly watched her fade. She lost her lovely hair. She needed a wheelchair to get around, and eventually she spent most of her days in bed. Dying is cruel to watch up close, the way the body fails. But dying, believing in Jesus as the resurrection and the life, that is beautiful to watch up close. My mother-in-law believed in Jesus. Oh, she feared lifts, she feared cats, but she did not fear dying. And I realized that is not everyone's story, and that can be very painful, challenging to us even, to share the gospel more urgently, to trust our shepherd. But she did believe. She knew that Jesus, her good shepherd, could call her by name out of death into glorious life, just like he did 2,000 years before when he stormed into a graveyard in Bethany and ordered a 4-day-old corpse to come out. I am the resurrection and the life, Jesus said. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? She believed it. And on the 10th of October, about midnight, as we sat round her bed, she took her last breath and she slipped into the loving arms of Jesus. There is nothing more precious, nothing that matters more than the gospel when someone dies. She is now with him, her good shepherd, who laid down his life for his sheep, for her, for me, for you. Don't you long to have a story like that? Don't you long for your friends in sport to have that belief that even though we die, through believing in Jesus, we will live? You know, those 2 girls I played hockey with, I don't think they believed. I'm not sure I was that bold in sharing the gospel. I tried. I'm trusting the Lord with that. But if we die believing in Jesus, we will live. They will live, come out of death and rise again into a new body, into a new creation, find a wonderful home with the Lord forever, safe and secure forever. So imagine one day soon, you are out with some friends in your sport, sharing life, and the conversation does move to death. Wouldn't this be a great story to tell? We have these precious gospels full of the power and the grace and the glory and love of Jesus to strengthen our faith. Yes, like I hope and think he has done for us these last 3 days, but also to share with others, to go, to be bold, to speak of the good news of Jesus to those in our sport, that they too might believe and find life in his name. The good shepherd has not yet called his sheep. I like that. Thanks last night. The good shepherd has not yet called all his sheep. There's more. There's many, many more sheep. Sheep in the world of sport. He will call. He will call by name. Let's show them Jesus. Let's take them Jesus together. He is the light of the world who gives life. He is the good shepherd. who has laid down his life for his sheep. He is the resurrection and the life, the great I am. Do you believe it?